D-Man got fame. What's going on, Clarence?
Cornmeal.
Let's do it. D-Man alright. Whoa. D-Man alright. Spicy Mafia. D-Man alright. Spicy Mafia. You gotta keep it spicy. If you see a queen, you better wife it. While we litter than a lighter, it makes things much brighter. So you gotta keep it spicy.
And with your ability to reflect and constantly ask that question, I've noticed, and I sort of counted you among the skeptics of the SLP token movement, and you kind of seeing that inside of Bitcoin Cash as something of a distraction. You were always kind of open to it, and you didn't mind talking about it, but in the ways that you can be sometimes. Look, I'd rather be over here doing this. You were for sure a token skeptic on Bitcoin Cash, right?
Well, didn't we have a talk about that where I was playing the skeptic role? Yeah,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, I enjoy people who show that they're willing to grow, and I hope that I show that I'm willing to grow. But several things lined up with that. I mean, John Old Fukeball reached out to me and actually gave me, before it was published, a draft of the SLP specification. And this was before the fork and all of that, right? I mean, if people go back, it's interesting. If people go back and look at the SLP specification and who the co-writers are on it, the co-authors, it's like all the huge contributors, but in addition, Ryan X. Charles and Unwriter, who are now sort of the big, thought leaders on the dev side of BSV. So this was like a really, there were a lot of minds on this thing, and I read it and I said, it had a big duh factor for me, which is like, you look at something and you go, well, duh, yeah, that just makes sense. And I looked at it and said, yeah, well, this is obviously the way that tokens should be done on Bitcoin. There's no question about it. Like, this is it. And it was simple. And so I thought, okay, that's kind of cool. But I had sort of the what would I say? There's a token, let's say stigma, maybe that's a good word for it.
Yeah, with ICOs.
Off of the ICOs, right? So I looked at it, and what did I see? I saw ERC20 tokens. They're the equivalent of ERC20 tokens on Bitcoin Cash. And so I said, okay, well, let's look at ERC20 tokens. And it actually had all of the things that ERC20 tokens had, including this gigantic UX anchor around its neck, which is the gas problem, which is that if you've ever used ERC20 tokens, you have to have an ERC20 token, and which is the Ethereum, the main ERC20 token. So when I say ERC20, this is everything from Tether and USDC down to, go down the list.
Even
right?
the
every
Petro,
ICO.
I think, right, of Venezuela.
Yes, I think the Petro, they started out on NEM, but then they ended up going to Ethereum. So this is basically the most basic Ethereum token that you would have gotten with an ICO. It's the token of value that you can move along. But the problem with moving it along is, in almost every case, you have to also have gas. Well, you have to have gas for every Ethereum transaction. Instead of a miner fee, since Ethereum is like a world computer, then every time you want it to run the program, which is the smart contract, every token is basically a reflection of a single program, a smart contract on Ethereum. In order to move it somewhere, you need to run that program. And to run that program, you've got to pay gas to the computer. You imagine it like a virtual steam engine, right? You've got to put some coal in there. And that creates a huge user experience problem, which is you can't just hold one token. You have to hold that token, and you have to hold some additional Ethereum. And so if I send you a token and you don't have any Ethereum in your wallet, well, it's stuck. You can't run the computer. So I kind of either have to send you Ethereum. The first people I saw trying to tackle this was Swarm City, which was a project that I was very hopeful for. They were trying to do like a decentralized Uber. And they got really close until they hit this wall. You know, even after they were victims of like the Parity wallet hack, they got some millions of dollars stolen from out of their sort of from their ICO budget. They were the one ICO that I went out and bought, and I actually the price ended up going up, and I actually made, you know, I did very well on that particular token. But they never were able to build the project out because they ran into this problem where, you know, you would pay somebody and then they couldn't move it, and they're, how do we get them Ethereum? And they tried all these different things. They were the first people I saw to come up with some idea of like a gas station protocol. Mm-hmm. So that you could pay with this token for gas on another smart contract is very complicated. And now there are things called meta transactions, which are out there, and a few projects are doing them, which is basically the same thing. But again, very, very complicated. And I saw that as being a problem. I thought, without this problem solved, the user experience is never going to be good enough for it to really take off.
And so what the SLP guys ended up doing is obviously settling on the Bitcoin Cash network, which is, you know, faster, cheaper, and so on. And and maybe the SLP token minting is just that much easier for a variety of reasons. But it came also with this, quote, gas problem, right?
Yes. So the way that it's set up, Bitcoin, they're Bitcoin transactions, so that's good. But the rules with the Bitcoin transaction is that the input amount has to be greater than the output amount, and it has to be greater than it by at least as much as necessary to pay for a miner fee. The way that this SLP thing was set up, essentially you are always going to need to add in an additional output. You could have SLP outputs, but you are always going to need some additional input, of just regular old BCH that wasn't SLP. And to me, I looked at it and I said, well, that's just the same user experience problem. Mm-hmm. So why should I bet? Like, I know this story. I know where this thing goes.
This kind of goes back to your tradition concept.
Exactly. So I said, okay, it's interesting. And also I didn't really see a lot of, I didn't see people using it as there being a lot of use cases. But then that changed for me. So it changed in three ways. The first was seeing Spice token not only start to get used, but get a price and actually get traded. And I thought that was very interesting because I hadn't even really seen that within the ERC20 tokens, like organically become popular enough that they got a price and markets, exchanges started trading it. That was interesting. Then Honest Coin, which is a US-backed stable coin, just the same as like Paxos or USDC came along. Okay, that was very interesting. And then Bitcoin.com did this dividend tool.
The calculator, yeah, that's awesome.
Calculator, which is basically using SLP tokens as almost like homing beacons to where you could send to addresses, and the fact that they were living there, that the SLP tokens were in these addresses, made them like homing beacons where you could like shoot BCH at specific addresses. And I was like, okay, this is really interesting. And then in around late July, I was driving to Southern California from Vegas, and I think I was listening to a podcast or something. I was with my wife, and this thought hit me, and I turned to her and I was like, Bitcoin is not money. And she was like, what are you and we started talking. And then people have probably seen me online, like going through, and part of me doing that over the summer until now was like getting people's responses back and seeing like, what is this thing that I'm thinking? But really what it came down to was that SLP, I think, is the future of Bitcoin Cash. And I think that,
wow.
Yeah, I think it is what is going to drive adoption of Bitcoin Cash. And because what it allows, and again, this is minus the UX issue, which is why I've done the recent work on it, was what I saw was if this user experience issue of this gas issue could be mitigated, what it would allow is what ERC20 had sort of promised. And that is, do you have a token of value of some sort? Bring it onto this chain, and on this one chain, they can all compete. So when people talk about, that there's going to be one chain to rule them all, that may be the case, but it's not going to be because all the merchants in the world switch over to BCH. It's going to be because in Russia they're using a ruble stablecoin that's running on SLP on BCH. In the US they're using a USD one. In Europe they're using a Euro one. The airlines for their airline miles are using airline miles, but they're running on BCH. But after a while, all of these, it's like the BCH is in the background. The fact that this is the network and the blockchain that's running it, that's all in the background. Nobody cares. And quite frankly, if you take that user experience issue out of the mix, if you don't have to get that extra BCH, there's no reason for me to even let you know that it's on Bitcoin Cash. We could say blockchain based, fine.
Mm-hmm.
But like, why do you even care? Like, why does the average user even care? If it looks like Venmo and it just works, PayPal, you don't know what kind of database PayPal's running. I don't know what kind of infrastructure Venmo has. I have no fucking clue. So that's, if we do that, then not only do we get things moved on to Bitcoin Cash, but you get this beautiful thing of an SLP token still has every single attribute that a BCH transaction has. Can't be censorship resistant, global, no borders, fast, cheap, reliable transactions, all of it. But people can have it in their own language, in their own milieu, and let them all compete with each other on one chain. And so that's what I knew SLP could be if this user experience nightmare of the gas problem could be alleviated.
And I love your solution, or your attempt at a solution, mostly because it's hopefully going to do what you're saying here, which is we were behind the, if we take the Bitcoin Cash community as a we, sort of behind the token craze. In other words, we haven't caught up to it yet. We sort of missed the ICO push, and so now where tokens are still relevant and taking off and doing things, there's a chance to actually, be right there at the start of this new market, this competitive marketplace that you're envisioning here. So what is the Simple Ledger Postage Protocol? So that you're changing the gas metaphor into postage.
Yeah, so gas doesn't really work for Bitcoin because you're not really, it's not like a machine that you're sort of putting gas in to run. So what this is more like, and why postage works, is you need to add a little something to broadcast or transmit, or let's say send or mail your signed transaction from one place to another. And what it basically, in a nutshell, what it allows is it allows the end user to pay their miner fee with the token that they have. So it would allow and I mean, I've actually built a fork of Badger where you can do this. Spice only, right? You've got your wallet. It's a Spice only wallet. I send Spice to, and now mind you, completely non-custodial still. You still have your 12-word phrase. It's all your keys. It's all your coins, but it's just branded as Spice. It only receives Spice. It only sees Spice. BCH or Bitcoin Cash is written nowhere on it. You never need to know there's Bitcoin Cash. And it allows you to basically pay your miner fee with Spice. And the way that it's doing that is it's taking advantage of the natural structure that Bitcoin has, as well as the way that SLP works, and the fact that you can attach. I can send a transaction that's otherwise completely invalid, and you can attach some BCH. I can send it to you. You can attach some BCH and send it on. And so basically what we have is that's, to me, that looked like postage, to where I go to the post office. The post office has the stamps. The stamps is what's necessary to move it on. I pay them cash, and they put the stamp on and they send it. And that's exactly what's happening here. So post offices are able to say, hey, we accept Spice, USDH, the ACD coin or whatever, the SAI coin, the new Sideshift AI coin. We'll accept that. This is how much we charge for this much BCH. Here's our address. If you send us a transaction which would be otherwise invalid because it doesn't have the BCH, but we see that you've given us the correct amount that we've asked for to our address, we'll stamp it for you and send it on. And it ends up being almost instant that this is able to occur. And I've got a video demo of doing it with Honest Coin up. And that solves it. And it solves it in a way that's not complex at all, and is actually in the workflow of how most wallets, certainly wallets like the Bitcoin.com wallet, work already, is that you take your transaction and you send it to the Bitcoin.com server and it broadcasts it up. So this is, it's within the current workflow. And I think that, the other great part about it is that it allows for some revenue to be generated. It allows for anybody to open up their own post office if they want. And it allows for, naturally, the economics of it is that the prices will get low because the post offices will compete on price. And wallets can even cycle through and find the best price from a list of post offices if they want to. Or, and one of the things that I think is probably more likely the way that this will work, wallet developers who are releasing free wallets for the first time can actually have revenue generation. So, and this is only possible because the fees are so low on Bitcoin Cash. So right now fees are like 1/3 of a cent, maybe something like that. So a wallet could charge 1/6 of a cent. I'm sorry, could charge like 2/3 of a cent.
I got you.
And so they would make the 1/3 of a cent, and the miner would make 1/3 of a cent. And I think most of us would be willing to pay 2/3 of a cent to be able to move our Spice or whatever. It still is essentially free, less than a penny. So yeah, this provides an opportunity to both solve the user experience problem, but also to have real competition and a real platform for tokens to be used in a way that where Bitcoin Cash is the rails, and that token comes out of the box with all of the things that BCH has. So it can be moved. It feels like BCH. The experience is like BCH. And then let people move their own tokens around and let's see what happens.
Yeah, and you're growing the ecosystem as you do it, and this is a whole new, business model that potentially could move in. I just, my mind begins to spin on these things. I think, well, I'll talk about the reception. I guess this kind of naturally goes into it, but is there a danger maybe of the privacy or censorship resistant aspect of having a postal service type arrangement where they could cut off a transaction they find distasteful for whatever reason?
Yeah, that's actually something that in the protocol itself, these were some good notes from Imaginary Username, actually, who was the first reviewer. There are actually 2 bottom notes, which are kind of best practices about incentives about this. That the 2 scenarios that I envisioned were, one, you could have a situation where, let's say there was like blacklisted addresses. I think that's a lot less likely than a post office deciding that it was more beneficial to them to not send your transaction on than to send it on if, let's say, they could figure out that you were, say, sending payment to a competitor, right? So you would figure that big businesses will be the ones running these post offices most likely. So if there was a competitor and they saw, oh, they're buying something from one of our competitors, we should, not do that. So one of the things that I discussed in there is that, don't reuse addresses. This, just as best practices, is probably unlikely that this would occur, actually, because it's about incentives again. But how can you mitigate this? Maximum privacy by not reusing addresses, or doing things like Cash Shuffle and Cash Fusion as that becomes more accepted in the community and more of a norm. These issues sort of right themselves. And that's for both the if you're doing like a payment protocol situation where you're using BIP70 as well, same sort of situation that on both sides address reuse is a big deal. But I think also having competition is very important, and this is an Austrian approach to it, right? That these things will work themselves out, because if you start getting your transaction denied, you can always go to the next postage server if there's more of them, right? And this can even be, and should be, you should have fallbacks that are written right into the software. So the only thing that they can't take your money, that's the most important part here. They can't take your money, a post office. They can't spend it for themselves. They can't change your transaction. The only thing that they can do is they can either add the postage or they can reject it. So it still is a trustless system, but of course they can always reject it. But that is technically, that's the same for any node that you broadcast to. Any node could choose to reject your transaction. But I think, at scale with the money involved, it's probably unlikely that it will be that there will be even an incentive to build software that will do that sort of filtering. It's much better to just take the money as it comes in.
And I saw online in a Reddit forum that there was someone actually trying to hire somebody to kind of work on your project and kind of bring it along, either for a wallet or what have you. But what's the general reception been like from the BCH community about your ideas here?
Oh no, it's been great, but I do think that, again, it's a time horizon thing. I'll give you an example of BIP70, which I've been banging the drums on payment protocols for the last year, right? But BIP70 was written by Gavin Andreessen and Mike Hearn in 2013. So, and were I not having banged the drums, and also, it's, if you look at, go back and look at the commits for both the Bitcoin.com wallet and for Badger, neither one of those would have BIP70 multi-output support if I hadn't actually gone and written the actual code myself, right? So these things don't happen by magic. It actually does take. I'm a big believer in the sort of the heroic individual or historical individual model of history. It really does take people to actually go out and do it. And the first people to do this, people were asking why I didn't open source this code. So one of the reasons I didn't open source the code is because CoinText is actually running a post office right now. So if I open source the code, it's a revenue generator. If I open source the code, then I actually introduce competition, and the time and effort that I've spent. I'm not somebody who's going to patent things. And I certainly am going to always release descriptions of the protocols. And I'm going to also probably open source clients for wallets if they want to use it. But am I going to give you all of the code to build your own post office? Probably not. Because these things are, at scale, these things are just money machines is what they are. So no, that's not going to happen. But as I've said to everybody, if anybody who's really interested in building these things, I will bend over backwards, and I have, and people can attest to the fact that I have for things like BIP70 servers. So when people are really interested and really trying to overcome the problems and they really hit walls, I will sit with them for hours at a time and work them out and get them figured out. And that I'm available to do. But for people who just want me to hand over businesses to them for free, you're probably not going to get that from me.
Crazy. You're crazy to do that. Seriously, I really do appreciate all of your time here. Let's in case people don't know where to find you, I wouldn't know why that'd be the case at this point, but let's tell them where to find your work and how they can keep up with all that you're doing.
So at Vin Armani is Twitter, and from Twitter, it'll probably link you to everywhere else, but also countermarkets.com. If people like some of these ideas and find them interesting, we've been for years now running a private subscription-only newsletter called Countermarkets, and these ideas and many more are in there. I write a column every single month, and I usually am sharing ideas in there that I'm not going to be sharing publicly for months, or sometimes like a year or more. But it really is a sort of a sounding board, and it's an interesting group of people. There's also a private Telegram group for anybody who's a subscriber, and you get a discount if you pay with cryptocurrency there. So countermarkets.com. I think if people like these ideas, that they'll really enjoy the stuff that's in there as well.
It is mandatory reading. I am on the chain there, as it were, and
Nice.
it's something that I open up all the time to look at and read. And from, I think the first thing I read that struck me was your meditation on who Satoshi was, and yeah, that sort of hooked me in. But in any case, the great Vin Armani, everybody, really appreciate all that you're doing, how you think about things, and super fascinating to keep up with you. And hopefully we'll talk soon, man.
Thanks, Kelso.